You 7 minutes for your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is about as straightforward as it comes. This amendment will strike all reconciliation instructions in the bill. My amendment strikes the instructions for reconciliation from the budget resolution and stops the Republican plans to pay for these massive tax cuts for billionaires on the backs of working Americans. Excuse me. You know, as has been discussed previously over the last several hours, the essence of what we have in front of us, this budget plan using reconciliation, is to provide $4.5 trillion of tax cuts. And we know from past data, from the nonpartisan source, the CBO, 83% of the tax cut, 83% of the money went to the richest 1% of Americans. My friends on the other side want to double down on that for the next decade and pay for it by cutting Medicaid to the tune of over $800 billion, as well as cutting the Affordable Care Act. Now, to tell you how many people that would impact, there's some 20 million Americans who get their health insurance through the ACA. There are 72 million Americans who are covered through Medicaid. So combined, we are talking about 92 million Americans. I mean, that is roughly about a third or so of the American people. However, even with those cuts, and there are more that I didn't outline, but those are some of the largest and most egregious, those cuts still don't add up to the size of the massive tax cut. So the way this resolution fills that gap is to blow a hole in our deficit and our national debt. Now look, we have had many conversations here over the last couple of years, sincere ones, in which the chairman and I have both expressed concern about the size and the trajectory of the national debt. I think it's fair to say the chairman sees it as a more immediate threat than I do. But even I have said repeatedly, when there was a Democrat in the White House, that the medium to long-term projections on our debt are clearly unsustainable. And I thought that 5 years ago about the 2030s, now here we are in 2025, and that is only 5 years away. Well, not only does this budget plan in no way deal with that problem that we have facing us in just a few short years, it actually doubles down and makes it worse. So my amendment, very simply put, would attempt to stop this damage. And you know, I just want to provide a little bit more information for the facts that I've laid out, because these are not opinions. These are facts from nonpartisan sources. The Congressional Budget Office found that including the cost of servicing the increased debt, which of course you have to include that to have a fair estimate, just passing an extension on the expiring tax cuts will cost $4.6 trillion over the decade. So, Mr. Chairman, I feel very strongly, as you know, that this is not the right approach as it relates to delivering tax cuts for those who don't need them. This is not the right approach in partially paying for them by cutting things like Medicaid and food assistance and the Affordable Care Act. And by the way, let me just quickly deal with something that came up over the last several hours. There were those who said, oh no, there's nothing in here that says we're cutting Medicaid. There's nothing in here that says we're cutting the Affordable Care Act. What it provides are instructions with specific amounts saying cut at least $880 billion or more. And the only areas that the Energy and Commerce Committee could look to provide those savings are Medicaid and the ACA. So if I don't lay out the number 4, but I lay out 2 plus 2, yes, we can fairly and honestly say I am laying out the number 4. It is quite obvious to everyone where exactly these cuts would come from because they have to come from there in order to be consistent with the instructions. Mr. Chairman, I believe very strongly this is a betrayal of the American middle class. This is a betrayal, actually, of the very people who helped make Donald Trump president. People who were, I think, genuinely concerned about the increased costs in our society. We have experienced worldwide, since the pandemic, a dramatic spike in inflation. President Trump won in part because he said, I'm going to lower costs on day one. Well, here we are where the rubber meets the road. Nothing in here whatsoever will bring costs down. In fact, by increasing the deficit, increasing the debt, by including massive tax cuts, all of that will spike inflation. And what does that mean? It means the Fed will have to keep interest rates at their current high level. In fact, there are some economists out today who, based on the latest inflation report, as well as some of these proposals, believe the next time the Fed is going to meet, an increase in interest rates is more likely than a decrease. The reality is this. The number one issue facing the American people, I think we all agree, is the cost of living. Donald Trump won for more than any other reason because he was saying he would address that. This budget resolution does absolutely nothing to fix that problem. In fact, it makes it worse. My amendment is an attempt to reverse that damage and prevent it from happening so that the working class and middle class families that I represent in Philadelphia will not feel the pain that will be inflicted upon them by this budget resolution. With that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Are there any members who would like to claim time in opposition to the amendment? Mr. Addison from North Carolina.
Thank you, Chairman.
You're recognized for 7 minutes.
Thanks, Chairman. In November, the American people delivered a mandate, a clear instruction for fiscal sanity, border security, and a government that prioritizes Americans over bureaucratic waste and abuse. That is exactly what this resolution delivers. Yet today, we see an attempt to strike the reconciliation instructions, a desperate move to protect the reckless spending and open border policies that have defined the last 4 years. For 4 years, Americans have endured runaway inflation and a border crisis that has put families in danger. And now, our colleagues across the aisle who created this mess want to strike the very instructions that begin to fix it. Let's be clear about what that really means. Striking the whole resolution means keeping a broken system in place. It means siding with criminals over law enforcement, and it means refusing to acknowledge the damage done by reckless, radical, woke policies. Now let's talk about the essential programs that Democrats claim to defend and accuse the Republicans of betraying the middle class for. $27 billion to a green energy slush fund, including $3 billion for tree planting, $1 billion for clean, heavy-duty vehicles, and even the failing U.S. Postal Service got $3 billion to replace its trucks with EVs. If this is true, that Republicans are betraying the middle class, then after 4 years of Joe Biden, why did the middle class all vote for us? To me, it's clear. Democrats are putting America last. This is why families have struggled to afford gas, groceries, and rent. You cannot make this up. Democrats are worried about making sure the post office has electric vehicles. The house is burning, and they're inside cooking dinner on their electric stove like nothing is wrong. It's time to wake up. This resolution before us today stops the bleeding. It cuts the bloat, it slashes waste, and ensures taxpayer dollars work for Americans, not radical pet projects. We are taking action where the Biden administration failed, period. More than 8.5 million illegal immigrants have flooded our borders under Biden. At least 1.7 million are known gotaways, many with criminal backgrounds. How do we know this? Because we see and hear about it daily. Mr. Chairman, I would seek unanimous consent to enter this document into the record that lays out an instance of this exact scenario.
Without objection, so ordered.
Right now, in my district, an illegal alien is sitting in the Davidson County Jail for the rape of a minor. A known criminal released multiple times due to the very policies that many here today are trying to preserve. I have 2 daughters, both under the age of 2, and I will do everything that I can do to ensure that they and no other family ever have to endure this nightmare. Communities across the country are paying the price for Washington's failure. Enough. The other side wants to protect the status quo, their woke spending, their radical environmental agenda, and their weak on crime policies. The American people demand better. And if November is an indication, they demand better now. This resolution allows our authorizing committees to provide for the common defense, to secure our sovereign borders, and to put America back on a strong fiscal path. Republicans are fulfilling their promises and bringing a firm end to the policies of the last 4 years. We are, and we will continue to put America first. I urge a no vote on this amendment.
With the balance of time, I would say if this Democrat amendment passes, there'll be a $400 billion tax increase for American families, individuals, and businesses. We will actually have a recession this year. We're trying to deport people who came to this country illegally, who are criminal aliens, who've committed crimes in our country. We couldn't do that without these resources. And there's $2.7 trillion in waste, fraud, and abuse in the people's government. And we're talking about reducing waste and unnecessary spending by $1.5 to $2 trillion. But there's $2.7 trillion. This amendment would not allow us to make the People's House run like the people run their families and their businesses. And that's just wrong. I yield to the ranking member for his final comments.
Well, several things here. First, there is no excuse and no defense of waste, fraud, and abuse. And frankly, I will not concede the point that anyone on the other side is more vigorous in opposing that than I am. Actually, as someone who believes that government can be a force for good in our society, I don't think government should be involved in everything. I think that our role of government is striking the right balance between that which the private sector does better versus those things that only government can do. However, if you find waste or fraud or abuse in government, that actually is offensive to me as someone who believes the government can do good things, as someone who believes in programs like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. So I am the last person who wants to see fraud in our government. But let's be clear, and with your indulgence, let's be clear. The idea that you're going to come up with $880 billion in savings from, quote, waste, fraud, and abuse, I have been hearing that my entire lifetime, that all we have to do is find this magical waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, if it's so easy, how come it hasn't happened my entire lifetime? $880 billion will be cut from Medicaid and from the Affordable Care Act, threatening health coverage. 92 million people, the 72 million who rely on Medicaid and the 20 million who rely on the ACA. Folks, they're coming after your Medicaid, they're coming after your health care, period, in order to pay for their large tax cuts for billionaires. That I yield back.
I appreciate it. With your indulgence, This is why we do not assess the federal government and the taxes that you pay to run this government of yours, is because anytime you try to reduce spending, find inefficiencies, it's characterized as cutting somebody's benefit. And so it scares everybody off, but I'm not scared, and my Republican colleagues aren't scared. In fact, we've never been more emboldened. And you watch what is happening with the Doge and Elon Musk, look at the resistance and look at the crazy stuff that they're finding that is an abomination and an embarrassment in what they're spending with your money. We're going in, and we're going in to make this government efficient and accountable to you, the people who work hard, pay your hard-earned tax dollars, and make sure that, in fact, the money's going where it should go, where we intend it to go, which is the people who we've made the promise to, not to fraudsters and not to people scamming the system. With that, go for it.
And I appreciate it. I think this is a good back and forth. Actually, I think I think we both agree, too little of this tends to happen in the way Congress is structured, because this is a sincere, and I apologize for those of you who are suffering with my voice as I get through some
Couldn't have worked
throat
out
issues.
better for me.
That's why, the chairman originally didn't have this markup for today, but when he heard I had throat troubles, he immediately wanted to take advantage of it. I appreciate the chair is sincere about genuinely cutting government, but let's make sure that we're letting people know what the real consequences will be. There will be real pain. You don't get $880 billion, as well as the other cuts that are in here, by just saying, oh, it's waste, fraud, and abuse. People need to know, if that is the intent, to really cut government and take some of the shrapnel, then we need to level people. There will be real pain. There will be cutbacks of services. There will be a real reduction of services, especially when it comes to health care. So if folks are sincere about cutting government, I would say just be genuine. Say, look, these are going to be the consequences. If you believe in cutting government, you think some of it is wasteful, but also own up to think, or just to acknowledge, you don't think government should be in the Medicaid business. You don't think government should be in the Affordable Care Act business, because that, in the end, is really what we're talking about.
I thank my friend from Pennsylvania.